Listeners, have you been struggling to pick yourself up after experiencing one or maybe many writing rejections in 2025? It's an experience that can make you feel so alone. But I want to be the first to say that we've all experienced the self doubts and even the shame a big rejection can create. Those doubts are why I created my free Ditch Your Inner Critic masterclass. In just a few minutes, you'll learn a simple process for shifting from a life with a snarky inner critic to working with the inner support you've been dreaming of. Be sure to use the link in the show notes to get your copy today and consider it your adjunct to the rejection strategies Lynn Shattuck, Kristin Sancken, and I will explore in this Editor's Roundtable episode. Because today, friends, we're going to get personal. We are going to share our personal rejection stories as we also show you how to reframe the no's you've received and how to pick yourself back up when the writing life gets tough. Be sure to stick around for the segment where I share what editors really mean when they say no to your work. And now, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Writing Resilience, the podcast for writers who want to write and live the story that sets them free. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison, a writer, transformational and trauma-informed coach, story alchemist, and fellow traveler on the winding road of healing and creativity. Each week, I'll share tools, practices, and conversations that will help you let go of what no longer serves you as you create stories that change lives, especially your own. Together, we'll explore how to trust your creative voice, support your mental health and resilience, work with your nervous system and unique design, and stay connected to your deepest calling as a writer, even when life gets messy. It's time, my friends, to write and live the story that sets you free. I'm honored to walk that journey alongside you, one story and one episode at a time. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Writing and Resilience podcast. My name is Lisa Cooper Ellison. I am a trauma-informed writing coach and your resident story alchemist, and I am so happy to be here with you, listeners, and also with Lynn Shattuck and Kristin Sancken because we are going to do another Editor's Roundtable. So welcome, Lynn and Kristin.
Hi.
Thank you. Yay.
Well, I'm really excited because not only are we going to talk about writing, but we're going to talk about, well, actually, we're going to respond to an email that I received by Robin Ryback. So, Robin, this episode is dedicated to you. And what I'm going to do, listeners, is just read from her note first, and then we're going to dive into one of the biggest issues that writers face, and that is rejection. So, let's go ahead and start with her note. I know I'm not alone in my sometimes deep struggle with writer rejection, both personalized and form letters with not interested after submitting a novel manuscript, short story, or poem. The feelings can come from being triggered by or being rejected and or devalued as a child. I would love to hear your wisdom and suggestions, and I know many other writers, especially women, can face this, and it may be directly related to having to prove oneself. Raise your hand if you have ever had issues with writer rejection. So, listeners, if you are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or another platform, you may not see our hands all raised high in the air. And we're doing a little like Queen's wave, right? So let's make it a little royal here for a second. But yeah, this is an issue that we all face. And I would say probably the number one reason why writers quit working on projects and why they quit trying to publish. So, we're going to begin by talking a little about our own experiences of rejection. And then we're going to talk about what do you do with that and how do you move forward and how do you keep going when it feels really vulnerable. So, that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to open the floor to whoever would like to share a writing rejection story or anything about like what rejections hurt the worst.
Yeah, for me, it was I have applied to several writers' retreats that require that you submit your writing and that you submit your resume. Storyknife Writers Retreat, which is a pretty big name one up in Alaska, that's for women. Here in Virginia, we have the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, the VCCA. Those are two things that have hurt the worst because I've submitted some of my best work and then not gotten in and then found out that friends got in. So that was what
Oh,
hurt
yeah.
most. It wasn't just that I didn't get in because I could have been like, oh, you know what? There's tons of writers. But then to find out like people I know and I've been in writing classes with and that I feel like I'm at their same level, they did get in. And those are the biggest hurts for me. I think if I can excuse it as like I just got to keep working on my craft, I just got to like hone this question. I keep got like if it's just like a skill issue, right? Like a craft issue, I can keep working on that. But when I feel this sense of like no, it must be me. Like it must be me personally because so and so got in or so and so got their piece published in this magazine. That's when I start to take it really personally and the rejections feel extra hard. That's the one that I thought of when I was preparing for the podcast and thinking about which rejections have made me like curl up into a ball and shed a few tears. It's those two writers' retreats where I've seen other friends get in.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna say ouch because that really hurts when that happens. And in that case, the big issue is comparison, right? We are comparing ourselves to someone else. And when we see our peers, people who are at the same level that we are, getting what we want, it really hurts and it can make us question our abilities. So, what about you, Lynn? What's your rejection story?
Yeah, I think the one that I remember the most vividly, which probably means it hurt the worst, is when I sent a query to kind of like my dream memoir literary agent. And I think she wrote back pretty rapidly, but it was definitely a no. For me, if it feels like it's a long time coming and I'm working really hard to get to this point, and I've had this person on my list forever, it feels like it's almost like that buildup of anticipation. It almost kind of met with the disappointment that I feel on the other side of it. I also think this must be like what gamblers feel when they first send something out, like this weird false confidence, like, of course they're going to love this, which does not really match the rest of my personality. I'm not necessarily like a super optimistic, confident person, but there's some little dopamine something that tells me it's going to be a yes, and then when it's a no, it's disappointing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The thing that feels like a shoe in and then suddenly it's not. And that is something I'm going to be talking about as well because there are really three different stories. I'm going to tell you the very abbreviated version of this because I could be here all day talking about just this, and we're not going to do that. So, first, I'm going to talk about how many times I have been rejected, and it's over 300. Okay, so I've had over 300 rejections by this point in my writing career. And some of the ones that have hurt the worst was one when I was first submitting work. And I had that kind of gambler's dopamine high of like, I've sent it out. It's going to be brilliant. It's amazing. It's going to get picked up. And then it was a no. And it was a form no. So then I was like, I don't know what to do about this. And so, of course, I sent it out again, gambler's high. And it stung and it made me question my confidence and whether or not I could do this. Like, should I quit? I mean, that was certainly a question that was on my mind. There were a few times when I felt like this is a no brainer. I am more than qualified. I will get into this thing. Other people I know, also at my same level, have gotten in. So, of course, this is going to work out because I've worked really hard. I've put in the effort. Maybe I've earned it, even. That could be an internal thought. I've earned it by showing up and showing up and showing up. And when that didn't happen and it felt like a shoe in, that somewhat broke my heart, right? That broke my heart because it was like, oh my gosh, I just felt like it was a yes. It had to be a yes. And then it was a no. And the third time that I want to talk about was a time when I submitted something and it did have a lot of trauma in it, but I had been very clear about how I had worked on this. And this was not like a trauma dump by any means. It was a story that was difficult. And I submitted it and I received this email that I think the person who was responding to me thought was kind. And the first sentence was, I'm so sorry for all of the things that you've been through. And the entire letter, which was a response to my manuscript, was about who I am or the trauma I had experienced and not wanting to hurt my feelings. And that stung because I felt like someone was trying to give me their sympathy. They were feeling sorry for me and they were not respecting me as a writer. And so that also hurt in a different way, right? So there are the expectations and the more professional places where you can have rejection, but then also these really personal things that can happen that also, I would say, dig into the stories we may have about ourselves. So, what do you all want to say in response to that?
I've had that experience of talking to someone in person and have them be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry for everything you're going through." And what's often funny, and I think a lot of trauma survivors can identify this, is that like you've often told them like maybe 5% of your story. And then they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Your life is so hard." And you're like, "Oh, honey, if you were overwhelmed by that, like, I don't know to tell you about I like tells me you're not a safe person to talk to about the rest of what's going on in my life." But that's on a different level. I think when you combine, I think what's so interesting about memoir writers and particularly memoir writers writing about trauma is that you're not only putting yourself out there, you're putting your craft out there within your personal life. And so sometimes those rejections can feel intertwined with your experiences. Like, are you rejecting my writing ability? Or are you rejecting that I lived through this actual
Yes.
experience? And are you not okay with the experience? Because I can't change that. I can't change that I went through this. I can change how the audience might receive it, how the reader might be able to identify with where I'm coming from. Those are all aspects of craft I can change. But it's that question of like the classic 12 step, like, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and the courage to change the things I can. Like, if I can't change my past and you're telling me that that's what you don't like about the piece, then it's like, sorry, like I literally can't change that. But if it's a craft issue, if it's about how I'm presenting this issue, then I can look at what am I doing that is overwhelming for the reader? How could I slow it down? How can I
Yes.
but editors who are couching within the issue of what actually happened versus what the craft changes are to make it more reader friendly, that can be a really tough line sometimes. And that
Yes.
rejection can start to feel really personal.
Yeah, I feel like it's not that different. It's kind of the same vein as when someone says, "Oh, this must be really therapeutic for you to write this." And basically, it's disregarding any skills that you might have in the craft of writing.
Yeah. In fact, Lily Danziger, when I was doing a pre interview for her episode when she was on the podcast, said she really bristled at the idea of writing being therapeutic because that therapeutic lens, which seems less serious, right, than someone who is creating art, is often applied to women, right? Our work is therapeutic, men's work is artistic. So then we begin to see ourselves in a different way, which is one of the reasons why navel gazing is a term that's often applied to memoir, when that is certainly not what people are doing. So when we think about rejection, we're going to obviously have to deal with our feelings, and we're going to talk about how we do that in a few minutes. But I want to pull back for a moment and say, how do we know what to do with rejections, right? Because there are tiers of rejections that you can get. So I'm going to go over those just very briefly. And then in the show notes, you will find a link to an article that has more information on the tiers. So the first tier is just a form rejection. Often, what that means is that the writing is not up to par, or that what you have submitted is so far removed from what this publication is looking for that it's just not a good match. In the query land, that could also mean that there's something going on with your query, right? So if you're submitting a book, it could be something's going on with your query if you're not hearing anything, or you're just getting form rejections. But if you're submitting an essay, a poem, or a short story, and you're getting the form, one of those two things is the issue. Either there are some issues with the writing itself, maybe the narrative arc is not clear, you're not hooking them in the first few pages, or what you've submitted is far afoot. If you get something more personalized, like we really love your work, but it's not a good match for this issue, what that means is that they actually like your writing. Submit something else. Now, don't rush to do that, because if you are rushing to do that, you are likely to send them something that is not as good, and therefore you may not get the yes that you're looking for. But that's a good sign that your writing is something that they appreciate. It's just that whatever you submitted either wasn't a good match for the theme they were working on, especially if this is a literary journal, or that it's still not quite within the realm of what they offer or what they are trying to publish. So there could be a scope issue. Also, it could be that your word count is too high, right? So really pay attention to word count limits. And listeners, I'm going to tell you something really, really important. I know that you will see an upper word count limit of 4,000 or 5,000 words in a literary journal. And let me tell you, there are very few people who will get accepted at that level. The sweet spot for many literary journals is between 1,500 and 2,500 words. So shorter is better, especially if you're a debut and you have never published someplace, and especially if you've never published at that journal. So that's kind of the next tier. If you get something that's really personalized, that means that it was close and they are a big fan of your work, and you should definitely submit something else. It also means that what you have submitted is within the scope of what that publication is trying to publish. And it is also aligned with what they're trying to do. It's just that for some of these places, they can only accept so many pieces, right? And so sometimes the acceptance rates are 1% or 3%. Right? If you have an acceptance rate that's that low, there are tons of people who are submitting wonderful work that there's nothing wrong with, and they just can't accept it all. And then, of course, at the top tier, there is the yes. So that's just a little bit of background around like what you can think about when you get these different kinds of rejections. And Lynn or Kristin, I'm going to see if you have anything else to say. And then we're going to get to the more emotional piece, which is the piece that we have more control over.
Yeah, I would say what you said early on, Lisa, about early in the career, those rejections hurt the most. I would say that that's very true. And partly that's true because I was very new to the field and I expected myself to be performing as if I was a professional when I was an amateur.
Yes.
And I was not allowing myself space to learn. I was not allowing myself to be a beginner. I held myself to this really impossible standard, and I would hear these things from other writers. Like, I remember being at a literary conference and they said, well, you should shoot for 100 rejections a year. And I remember feeling so overwhelmed by that number. I was like, 100 rejections? That's going to like bury me. That's going to be terrible. For a year, I tried to do that. I tried to submit any time I had an essay to as many places as I could. And it just wasn't a strategy that worked for me. And the more I got into writing and the craft and the feel of it, the more I learned what my particular submission strategy was. So I think every writer has a different submission strategy. And I think you have to do what works for you. I think just this scattershot, send essays to every single journal that's on submittable works for some writers. It didn't work for me. And so what worked for me then was to figure out, okay, when I have a piece that I know is ready to publish, how do I do the research to find the journal that's right for it? How do I make sure that that's a match that I'm going for intentionally and I'm not just setting out a million copies to whoever? If I know it's going to be, here's my essay about parenting and motherhood, and like I'm not going to submit that to a literary journal unless it's highly literary, and it wasn't, right? So then I was like, okay, I'm going to look at motherly, I'm going to look at these other things that really specialize in those issues. And then my acceptance rates started going up because I was making smart decisions and because I was working smarter and not like, what is it, smarter not harder?
Yep.
Like that's like, so I also think that part of those early rejections taught me how to submit better, taught me how to make better matches with what my writing was and the audience it needed to reach.
Yeah. What about you, Lynn? What's your submission strategy, or what else would you like to say about, especially those early rejections and what they taught you?
It's hard, it's painful. I think because of the amount of rejection that happens, I don't know. I kind of feel like, would any of us do this if we had another choice? Like if there was another
Right.
vocation that was really calling to us, would we really do this thing that puts us in, the face of rejection over and over again? I will say lately, I think what I've been doing is not submitting as much, and not for any particular reason, but just enjoying the process of writing again and not having it be about, like going fishing. Like it's not about how many fish I'm trying to get right now. It's about like how much writing can I do that I really feel good about and fuels me. And yeah, hopefully it will see the light of day and not just, be in my flash drive or whatever. But I think that pulling back and I don't know, I guess having a sense of agency about it can feel really nice.
Yeah, I love that you said that because there are so many times when we are submitting work because we want to feel better about ourselves or we want to feel legit, right? Like, I'm a legitimate writer and I know I'm a legitimate writer because I have work out there and it's getting published, or that's what we hope for. And the reality is that if you sit down to write, you are a writer, period, end of story. Now, do you want to be a professional writer where you're getting paid for your work? That is something different. But just to be a writer means you're just showing up to write. And I think sometimes we can get so tied up in outcomes that we forget to focus on the joy and the importance of that. And I find for myself, in the beginning, I felt like, oh, I've got to get this publication because if I get this publication, I'm going to feel like a real writer. I'm going to feel like I'm doing it. And so then I did send out a lot of work. And like you, Kristen, it helped me build a strategy around where do I want to send my work and how do I want to send it out. And what I find for myself, that timing matters, right? That timing matters too. And it's not just about like creating some sort of viral moment or that special thing. It's about that internal timing. So I spend a lot more time listening to what's going on inside me. And so, for instance, I had a publication earlier this year that I had written like a year and a half before. And I think I sent it out one or two times, nothing happened, but there was no energy around it, like no energy around it's time to send it out. And then suddenly I had this urge to send it out, and I did, and then it got picked up. So I think being able to listen to that inner call is really important, in addition to finding places that are a good match. But what happens is, and I'll be the first one to raise my hand and say, it's totally happened to me. We go into our heads, and our head says, you should send something out. You haven't done that in a while. A real writer would have another publication under their belt so that they could feel good about it. Right. So we start thinking it from our minds, and then that ends up derailing our process because it's not time yet. And therefore, we get more rejections, and then we don't feel as good about our writing.
Yes, definitely. And that approach to writing as an intuitive spiritual process, I feel like is so hard to often match with the market of writing,
Yes.
right? Like the two don't go together well. But we know that the best writing comes from something that's deeper. And so, yeah, that mix is a really the timing of the two things coming together is when the magic happens. If somehow the market wants what also the spiritual world wants, then it's kind of a magic moment.
Exactly. And, we have to be willing to believe in ourselves enough to allow that to happen within the timing that it's supposed to happen. And that can be a tall order. So, we're going to shift gears. We've talked a little bit about strategy and some of that tactical thing of like, okay, I got a rejection. What does it mean? What am I going to do with it? But I really want to dive into the emotional piece and talk about how we navigate that, because sometimes when we get a no, that no may truly be just about it's not a good fit, or we got too many great things and we can't publish them all. And so we're going to say no, or 10,000 other factors that you and I can't even imagine that go into the no's that we receive. But what can happen, and I think this happens a lot to women and also to trauma survivors, especially, is that we get a no, and it seems like it's not just a no to the work, it's a no to us. And therefore, it becomes a source of shame. And I can say for myself, something that was a big revelation for me, and was something I learned through having my business for 10 years now, is that I was never taught how to fail, right? I was taught that if I received no's, if I had rejections, if there were obstacles in my path, it meant that I was not talented enough and therefore I should quit because there was something wrong with me. And so when I got those early rejections, and especially those other rejections where I had these expectations that just weren't met, I would feel that shame powerfully. And then I would think there's something wrong with me, and that could take me down a deep spiral. Kristen or Lynn, has that happened to you?
I think that's an indicator for me if I'm having that response that maybe something else is going on, that there's work to do. I feel like the more work that I do personally on myself, it's not like the rejections are never fun. You never like open your inbox and you're like, yay. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I think earlier in life, I was really sensitive to rejection and I did take it as a statement about who I was. And it was about me not being good enough, not like this piece of writing may not fit for this publication. And I fortunately don't feel that way quite as much anymore. I'm not looking for approval, I guess, right? Like I'm not looking for an editor to tell me that I'm good enough or not.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think one of the things that I learned as a child growing up in high control religion is that to see that as God's will, that if someone says no to you, it means God doesn't want you either. And which is like, oh, like the weight
Yeah.
of that, right? Like, not only does that publication not want you, this is a sign from God that you're not supposed to be doing this. And to overcome that patterning in my thought process that somehow other people's rejection was also God's rejection, and to really just see it as a business transaction, to
Yeah.
begin to learn like this for them is purely, will this get more people reading our magazine because it matches with what our magazine does or our journal or whatever, or will it not? And to remember that like it's not God. I think often in the world of high control religion, everything is seen as some sort of greater good or greater force of evil, and everything's good or bad or left or right or black or white, or and to not spiritualize that rejection, to not make it something that's bigger than what it is.
Yeah, I love that because there's so much about the story that we're telling ourselves about what's happening. And like you said, Lynn, sometimes we have work to do. And so that's okay. We want to be willing to do the work. So I want to unpack this a little bit just to give you a sense of how I do this so that if you're in the doldrums and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going to quit writing because this is just not fun and I'm feeling that shame, here's how it works for me. So the first thing is I have to know what's going on, right? And so if I receive a rejection and I'm feeling really bad about it, I pause and let myself feel bad. It is okay to feel bad. And because I think one of two things will happen on social media. You'll see someone, share their terrible story and then there's a thousand, messages of like you can do it. It's okay. And what does that say? Right? On the one hand, that is really supportive and that is helpful and it's wonderful when that happens, but it's also saying your feelings are not valid. The other thing you'll see is people who put on that super brave face and they want to be the superhero and it's like nothing ever, hits me. I have this force field in front of me and everything bounces off. Well, what does that also say? Your feelings don't matter. So if you are hurting because you got a rejection that either didn't live up to your expectations or you're feeling tired because you've been rejected a whole bunch of times. So many people have been there and your feelings are valid and it is okay to feel that. So give yourself the chance to cry, walk around, rage, write an a fuck you letter to that editor, but don't ever, 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 ever send it. Okay. Don't ever send that. But it is okay if you're feeling angry, right? You can also feel angry about something and then you write about it, right? So that's the first thing is find ways to navigate your feelings in a helpful way. Sending rage letters to editors is never helpful. So just want to say that another time because I feel like that's important. But after you've done that, it's important to use your writing process to say what's really going on with me. What does this remind me of? Okay. Because usually this is how you know if it's more work to do or something that's bigger is that the rejection happens and you start having other memories about other things in your life. Okay. So you tend to find that this emotional signature is associated with a number of different memories. Okay. Well, what was going on in those memories? How did you react or how were you treated? Or what messages did you receive? So, what's going on there? Because once you understand the root cause, you can begin to work with it. you can get really curious about what that part of you that may be still stuck back in that place needs. And so you can do that through the writing process. You can say, I'm here to learn from you or understand you. Help me understand what it is that you need. How can I support you so that we together can move on and do something else? Because once you have a chance to work with those feelings and understand the root cause, then you can build some strategies around what has happened so that you can talk to yourself in a different way, right? Because if you just go from, okay, I got this rejection and I'm going to do like positive self talk, like, there is a place for everything, or, all writers experience rejection. It's just a business. Whatever that statement is, it is not going to help you if you don't go through the entire process. So give yourself time to do that. And then you can say, okay, now what do I want to do with this project? And so before we move on to the next question, does anyone have anything you'd like to share in response to that?
I mean, I always approach things from a polyvagal perspective, which is a very like fancy word of saying like with the way that your nervous system works, the
Yes.
vagus nerve that runs from your brain down to your stomach. And one of the things I know about myself is I am the person who goes into dorsal vagal, which means like I go into shutdown. Like I become a mole. Like I don't leave the house for a few days. I get real quiet and still. I like wrap myself in a blanket. Like I literally I think my spirit animal is a mole because, like, that's how I cope with stuff, and I think, like you said, sometimes giving permission to myself to say, like, "Okay, I received a big rejection or big news that I didn't wanna hear, and so before I respond to anything, I'm gonna let myself go down into that mole place where I find safety and where I feel like I can really be, and process it for a little while. Listen to the music that soothes me, drink a cup of tea, like hug my loved ones. That's how I am able to then come back out of my little mole hole and like engage with the world again. And then I can look back at the piece and do the intellectual work it takes to make the changes it needs to make to meet the standard that I know that I want it to be. But to go through, like you were saying, that emotional process first, to give yourself permission to do whatever your body does after rejection. So whether it's rage or whether it's for me, just like disappear for a few days, like, but make sure that you're not letting anyone down in that process, you know? So like check your email or put on a wave message that says like taking a few days for myself, like, but letting yourself feel those feelings so that you are learning to address that emotional signature.
Absolutely. And I would also say stay off social media when that's going on
Oh,
because
100%. It's the worst.
yes, that is the biggest way to get into that state of comparison and that is not going to help you. So, Lynn, when you are thinking about this process and you've come to those places in the past where it's like, "Oh, there's more work to do." What's been your go-to?
I think it's similar to what you've each said, that you just take some time and let it roll over you. And there is kind of a natural beginning, middle, and end to that process usually. I think having a writing community is helpful because it can be, we can forget that like this is normal. Like it's normal to mostly get rejections. Like that is normal for writers. I think having other people that understand that and that you can vent a little bit to is helpful. And then the other perspective, I don't know, I think we have a really fast paced world that we're living in. And I think there's almost like kind of, hedonic adaptation when you get used to the good things in your life and then you want the next, well, this is not good enough anymore. And now I need a new car or whatever. I think something that I try to do is to remember the wins and to really savor those wins when you do get them and to really celebrate them and not just kind of shove them under the rug. Cause I think for a long time I would tend to do that. And maybe partly as women, we're not taught to like say, yay, I did this great thing. I got an acceptance or whatever. We're not really encouraged to do that. I think as a writer, it's necessary to savor those wins and to remind ourselves that we are accomplished, where we have written things that were good. Yeah.
I love that. Number 1, make sure that you have a writing community and that you're talking to the writing community because Well, it's fine to talk to a partner, a friend, or someone else who's not a writer. They don't get it. They don't understand how common this is. And so I'm sure they will comfort you in the very best way they can. But the writing community can normalize your experience. And when you hear how someone else has dealt with something, you can find other ways to deal with that too. Also, that hedonic cycle that you were talking about, I'm so glad you brought that up. This idea that we have to get more and more and more, and it needs to be better and better and better and quicker and quicker and quicker. There's two ways that I want you to think about your accomplishments. Number one, on a quarterly basis, look back over that quarter and say, what did you do well? What are you proud of? What are your wins? Understanding that they can be anything. And when you do that, that alone will shift your mindset. Also, it's really important to look for the win within your rejection, even, well, I'll say after you've had a chance to go through this cycle, right? Don't start there. Okay. Let yourself have whatever emotional experience you're going to have. But then, we just talked about those different tiers. Even if you got a form rejection, you showed up, and that alone is amazing. You got some sort of response beyond thanks, but it's not for us. Holy cow, they took the time to really give your work their attention and they like it, especially if they said, please send us more work. So you can think about any of these as wins in your own life, and then you can use that information also to bolster yourself up. The other thing I want to talk about is when we think about this from a polyvagal perspective, there is the emotional experience, right? The emotion, which we have given some sort of story to, but then there's also just that physical response. So here are some polyvagal techniques you can use to shake off rejection, angst, anxiety, rage, upset, whatever it is. Number one, you can shake or you can have a dance party, right? So I have a writing class right now, and we have a dance party at the intermission of every class, which is very fun. But when you're doing that, you are shaking out that energy. You can also use the emotional freedom technique, which is a form of tapping. And I will put a link in there if you want to learn more about tapping. But when you are tapping, you are rewiring your nervous system. So that's another thing that you can do. Or you can just go for a walk, right? So you have a number of different ways to work with the body's responses so that you can get back to that baseline and then figure out what you're going to do when you've received a rejection. So it's obviously been a no from whatever that publication is, but the work is still a yes inside of you. So now that's what we're going to talk about as we begin to wrap up. What do you do when the work is a yes for you, but it's been a no for other people? I want to give this to you first, Lynn, because you have a pretty powerful story about what you did with that.
Yeah. So for a really long time, I wanted to publish an anthology of writing on sibling loss because there's just not very much literature out there on the topic. So for a couple of years, myself and my co-editor, Allison, worked on compiling these essays. And I had that gambler's like, yeah, we're going to send this to Sounds True. And they're going to be, of course, we're going to publish this. And that was not how it went. We heard a lot of radio silence. We heard a lot of, this is sad, this is too sad, or this seems important, but we don't know where to sell it. And I think because we had done so much work and we had these stories that people had trusted us with, we eventually got to the point where we decided to publish it on our own. The experience of rejecting it or saying that people didn't know where they could, how to market it or how to sell it was so much like the experience of losing a sibling and having that loss kind of go underground, that I think we got to a certain point where it's like, screw this. We're going to do this. Like, this needs to be out in the world. We know that there are people that will buy it, and we believe in it, and we believe in the stories that we've collected enough to do it. So it really became an act of defiance in a really empowering way.
And I am blessed to be one of the authors in this anthology. And so a link to the anthology will be in the show notes, because one of the best ways that you can support people who are believing in themselves is by buying their work. So that is an opportunity you will have as a part of this podcast episode. So, yeah, so you decided, okay, accepting the no is really similar to accepting what the experience is of being a sibling survivor. And I'm not doing that. I'm changing the story by claiming my agency and publishing my work. And I think that is one of the most powerful things you can do is to take the power back into your own hands and decide what you want to do, whether that's self-publishing or not. It can be anything, but it's about the agency that you have. What are some things that you've done, Kristen, to say yes to yourself and yes to your work, even though you've been receiving rejections?
I mean, one of the biggest things I did was to create my own Substack to say, there are essays I know other people need to read and that may never get into a journal because they're really niche or because I don't have the time to submit. Often with these lead times, right? Journals need like 3 to 6 months, and you're like, but this would be best published like next week, and so you don't always have the time to get it to an editor. And so you're like, I know this needs to be out there now, and so creating my own Substack has been great for that. It's also given me my own feedback to know what settles with readers and what doesn't. And some of that has been really interesting to just look at your own data and to say, like, oh, this piece that I loved, that I thought was really amazing, other people did not, so, or this piece that I thought was just sort of a off the cuff, silly, like that really resonated with people. So, giving myself ways to connect with audiences for when I don't feel like going through the submission process has been hugely helpful. But I also think, I have several manuscripts of books that I feel like I have done so many drafts on, and I just have this gut feeling like they're just not ready yet. They're just not ready yet. So I just keep working on it and keep praying about it and keep like feeling like the right person's going to come along at the right time
Yes.
to figure out where it belongs or to get the manuscript to the next level. I just have faith that that's going to happen with these manuscripts, which is crazy making to anyone who like expects to make money off of writing because you're just sitting on it. You're not like publishing it or like, but I have faith that they're just not ready yet and they need more work. Those are the two things I feel like when there's something for me that's a big yes, but I keep hearing no, is to either, like Lynn said, find a way to self-publish. And for me, for essays, that's been Substack. And then the other thing is to just sit on it for as long as it needs to be sat on until you hear within yourself, it's ready. And that's not an excuse to be like, I'm going to sit on it because I'm afraid, or I'm going to sit on it because I don't want to look at it again. Or it's really just like coming back to it every now and then and be like, what could I change this time? It doesn't need anything this time. Is it ready? Who's the person that might be able to get this ready? With one of my manuscripts, I just hired my own developmental editor to edit because I was like, you know what? I do this for other people. And what would really be helpful to me right now is to have an outside eye look at this and tell me
Yes.
what's next. Because, professional athletes hire coaches. Like, if you're a swimmer and you want to shave a half second off your time, like, even the best of the best are out there looking for help. And so there's no shame in saying, like, you know what? I think I need a professional to look at this. I need another writer friend to look at this just to see maybe what I'm missing.
Absolutely. And I would say that the best coaches have coaches themselves. That is definitely true. And that's definitely been my experience. And there are two writing experiences I want to talk about in terms of work that has been shelved and work that is in process and we're waiting for the right time. So, last time we had an editor's roundtable, we were talking about metaphors, and I mentioned a poem that I had written quite some time ago. I think, oh my gosh, I don't even want to say 30 years ago because that just is like, ooh, but it was probably close to 30 years ago. Anyway, so I wrote this poem and it was very meaningful to me. And I did send it out a few times and it got rejected. But also, I had worked with Frank Bedart, who is like this fancy poet who came into our school and he did this like workshop and said all these great things. So I knew there was potential in this poem. So it got rejected. This was early on. And I was like, wow, this is not fun. And I'm going to date myself because I'm going to talk about like how I submitted my work. This was back when you had to send a cover letter that you had written, often a handwritten one because maybe you didn't have a typewriter at your house. And then you had to put in the self addressed stamped envelope in there where you wait forever and ever and ever. And then this self addressed stamped envelope comes back to you. And if you get that, it is more than likely a rejection. So That happened. I put it away and said, okay, this is not meant for the prime time. Moving on. I picked it back up recently and I was like, wow, I see why Frank Bedart was saying all these great things about this piece. I also see why it was rejected. And because I'm a much better writer now, I can go ahead and make those changes to get that ready and send it out because it is calling to me, right? So it is calling to me. That tells me the energy's there. I have other projects where I would love for them to be published right now and they need more work and I know it. And so part of being a good writer and even a great writer is to, set your ego aside so that you can focus on creating great work because it's going to have its own timeline and you have to know when it's ready. And that's not a process that's fulfilling to the ego most of the time. The other time, I had this essay that I wrote and I sent it out and heard nothing, and sent it out and heard nothing. And then I felt discouraged. And so I put it away for a little while. But then it kept calling to me. And I was like, little essay, I really love you. And I just feel like there's something there. So I would say a little prayer over this essay. After I revised it a few more times, then I would send it out. And then I got more rejections. And I was like, I don't know. Maybe this essay is just not meant for the world. Well, I ended up at, I think it was Hippocamp, the Hippocampus conference in 2017. And I think, Kristen, you were actually there with me.
Yeah, we went together.
Yep, we were
Yeah.
there and we were just at lunch. And I
Was
happened
this
to
when you ran
see
into the Kenyon Review?
editor. Yeah, Gita
Oh, this is
Chitari.
a great story.
Yeah, so we just happened to be going through the lunch line and I saw Gita and I had seen Gita at another writing conference last year and I was not trying to be creepy and pitch or something, okay? So don't do that. Definitely don't do that. I was just like, "Oh, hey Gita, it's great to see you again. I really loved, your presentation and what you had to say," which happened to be on rejection. And what she had said was that if you're rejected quickly, that's actually a gift because then you can move on. And it's so much better than when you have to wait 6 or 9 months. So I was telling her about rejection and we were talking about that. And I said, "What's up with at the magazine? What are you doing?" And she just, told me what she was up to. And she said, "What are you working on?" And I said, "Oh, I've got a few different essays." She said, "Send me one." And she told me exactly what to do so that I could send it and it would bypass the slush pile and go directly to her. And she read it and she's not the final person. There's the managing editor was above her at that time and that person was the person who would say yes or no. But she would give it, a good read through and she would let me know. Well, it went to him and it was a yes. And what was so wild is that there were a number of lower level places. Like when we think about the tiers of prestige, okay, we'll just talk about it that the tiers of prestige, literary journals that were not as prestigious that had rejected this piece. And it was rejected 25 times. 25 times. But
Wow.
I had this internal yes that it was a good essay. And I sent out that last one to Gita with the prayer, and it ended up working out. And I'll also link to that in the show notes just so that you can read it if you would like. But that's just to say, you've just heard three different ways that people deal with rejection and make decisions, and you have an infinite number of possibilities. What's most important is that you, one, attend to your own experience, that you make decisions based on your own internal knowing, which is different from that sense that I have to prove myself to others that usually comes from the ego. And then to really love your art, to love it enough to make it the best it can possibly be, understanding that it can take many, many drafts. And that piece that was rejected 25 times probably had, oh my gosh, over all of those periods of times, at least 75 drafts. No joke, 75 drafts. But it was the 75th draft that was the one that needed to be published. So we are going to wrap up now with just three bits of encouragement for you. So I'm going to pass the baton to you, Kristen. Just what do you want to say to Robin and to all the other writers out there who are experiencing rejection and they are looking for ways to take that next step forward?
Gosh, I really liked what you said about the ego. that often there's a greater truth in the story or the essay that's more important than your own ego. And in service to the greater good, you got to kind of get out of the way. So, believing in that greater good to get you out of your own head and connected to the collective, if you can keep doing that, you're going to keep moving forward.
Beautiful. What about you, Lynn?
I love that. Yeah, I think I don't want to just say ditto, but kind of ditto. I think, and it may be different for each of us, but finding a way that you are able to tap into that place where it feels like you're a channel instead of, it's not like I, Lynn, am writing an essay, but like I am tapping into something that the universe is asking me to channel right now. So whether it's meditation or going for walks or whatever, whatever process helps you get there, I think that's really, really good advice.
Yeah, thank you to the two of you for that. It was really beautiful. And so I'm going to wrap up by saying your story matters. It matters first and foremost to you, and it is the art that you are here to put out into the world. So trust that and trust this process. I also want you to understand that there are so many writers that are ahead of you who are extending their hands to you to help you move forward. Your job is simply to look up to them, reach out to them, and to allow them to support this process. Because we are three people here who are saying, we have been there, we know what it's like, and we are cheering you on as you continue to show up. I also want to say that if you are at the point where you are trying to get your work published, you are submitting your work, you are showing up, and that is incredible. And you are paving the way for someone behind you who has yet to do that. You are giving them an opportunity. So understand that your courage in this area is both magnetic in terms of it is helping you move in the direction that you want, but it is also something that is inspiring to other people. And so don't forget that when you show up, you are inspiring someone else to show up. When you experience a setback and you keep going, you are inspiring someone else to do the same thing. And that is incredibly powerful. So, really trust in the power of all of the things that you're doing and know that you have everything you need and you have an infinite number of possibilities in terms of how you can get your work out into the world. So, it is a guarantee that when it is ready, and if you are interested and willing, your work will be read by the people who need to read it. And so we thank you for writing it. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this podcast without your support. If you love this episode, here are 3 simple ways that you can keep this show thriving. 1, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. 2, leave a 5-star review so others can find the show. 3, join my engaged dynamic community by signing up for the Writing and Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Ditch Your Inner Critic, 5 tools to transform self-doubt into self-support. Until next time, remember that your story matters. As you write and connect with the truest, most authentic version, you become not just the writer, but the person you're meant to be. And that, my friends, is the real freedom writing can offer.